And we're going to share a screen here. Okay, we're going to continue our study of the Ten Commandments, and we'll probably finish those up. If the Lord willing, maybe next week will be our last class on the Ten Commandments. So we're gonna talk about Exodus chapter 20 and verse 16. And as always, I'm gonna ask you to participate and invite your comments and questions as we go along. Just reviewing what we've talked about so far, we've been looking at the Ten Commandments as they are revealed in Exodus 20, given to the Israelites, and with a view towards not only understanding what God was expecting of the Israelites, but as well looking at these Ten Commandments as they are exist in principle in the teachings of the New Testament, and to understand the implications of God's law here in our own personal lives as Christians today. We are not under the Ten Commandments as a codified law because that was given only to the Jews, but many of the Ten Commandments are repeated in the New Testament, and some of the principles that are behind these particular, what I think are representative commandments of all the law. We can learn some things about God. We can learn some things about our relationship to God through looking at what He even required of the Israelites. So that's kind of what we've been doing and going through the commandments one by one, though we've been away from them for a while. We're going to go back and talk about tonight the idea of not bearing false witness. I came across an interesting observation by Burton Kaufman, who writes commentary on Scripture. In talking about the Ten Commandments, he said that each of the commandments that are given on the horizontal relationship, you remember the first four are about our relationship to God, and then from that point on, beginning with commandment number 5, it has to do with our relationship with each other. He makes the comment that in those last commandments, they all guard against something. They're all intended to guard against something that he wants protecting, which I thought was an interesting observation. He says that commandment number 5, to honor your father and mother, guards that authority of that relationship and the home. Number 6, about murder, guards life. Number 7, guards marriage, the commandment against adultery. Number 8 regards property rights and the dignity of the individual. And number 9 guards the truth and the reputation of truthful men. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting observation. I never heard that before in terms of looking at those commandments altogether, that God does value what He's given us. And the commandments that He presents that are here in a negative form, don't do this, don't do that, are not just to restrict behavior, but they are a guard post against the defilement of the relationships itself and those things that God has provided for us. And I think that's certainly true here in number 9 about bearing false witness. That God revalues the truth, not only the truth that He's revealed to us, what we think of as doctrine, the truth that's once been revealed in Scripture, but He values the truth that we express to each other, and the truth as it is the basis of a relationship. So he protects reality in a sense by the commandment that we're not allowed to just say whatever we want to about somebody else, and we can't bear false witness. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means as we go along. Just the definitions. The commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, is how the ESV version reads that. Well, what is false witness? Well, the word false is a Hebrew word that simply means an untruth. It means something that's a sham. It appears to be one thing, but it's not really. It's the idea of a lie, and this word is translated by the idea of lying or telling a lie, just in the idea of something that's false. So a lie is false. The word witness abstractly means testimony. It means that you say something about something that you saw or that you record something down. So to provide an untruthful witness, you see, means to testify to what is true, particularly about another person. So you see something or you know something about another person, and then you testify to it in an untruthful way. So you lie about somebody else is really basically what it is. It's synonymous with lying, and it's the terminology of false witness in the Old Testament, particularly, I believe, is synonymous with the idea of lying in general, though it is a more specific term. The language is from where? Where do we usually give witness or think about witness being given?
In a judicial situation.
That's right, in a courtroom judicial situation. And it applies to that because the Jews were to bear witness to each other. Something could be held to be true if it was verified by two or more witnesses. And the judicial system under the old law was based upon individuals giving eyewitness accounts. So God warns against somebody who would say something wrong and get somebody else in trouble or get somebody else punished because it told something that's wrong. But it is also used in a more broad way. It's not restricted to perjury. It's not restricted to public testimony given in court. One could bear false witness against somebody in a private way. It could bear false witness by lying about that person to just another person in a private conversation. We can recognize false witness in more subtle ways as well, and we'll talk about some of those ways in which we maybe have to be careful about violating this commandment, particularly as we look at it broadly in the aspect of lying. But it's lying that has the result of misrepresenting someone else in that respect. I think that's what we see in it. Well, how serious of a thing was it? It was synonymous with lying, and there is associated with other things. And this is one way to look at, I believe, God's attitude about certain sins, certain activities, is you see how he groups them together with other things. We make that point about being disobedient to parents, where it's thrown in the mix in Paul's writing with very serious sins like adultery. We don't usually think being disobedient to parents is as bad as adultery, but God groups it together in inspired writing. And so we see things that are associated with false witness. It helps us to understand the severity of it. It's associated with being allied with the wicked. Exodus 23, you shall not spread a false report. You should not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. That's what we might think of as conspiracy. And is that what he's talking about there? You get together with some other folks, say, we're going to lie about this person, or we're going to put testimony before it, maybe that other people will believe. So it is associated with wickedness and wicked intent. It's associated with the willingness to do violence. So the proverb writer says, give me not up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and they breathe out violence. So a person who's willing to lie about somebody else is actually being violent towards that person. And certainly we might be able to believe that person would be willing to be violent if he's willing to tell a lie about another person. And sometimes it leads to that. It's associated with sowing discord among brothers. So if you lie about somebody else, then you separate people, you cause division. And so a false witness breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers is one of the things that God hates. And that passage in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 19, where it lists the things God hates or is abomination to him, it's interesting that in those, what are there, 7 things there that God hates, that 2 of those are right here what we're talking about. He mentions lying specifically, and then he mentions false witness. So 2 of those things have to do with not telling the truth in that. Lying lips, and I think, and a false witness that breathes out lies are things that God...
Also, that it is a complete disregard for God's character.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. Because God doesn't lie to us. And he doesn't, he's in no way a false witness of things that are real. That's exactly right. And that's a good way to look at these commands. I think we've mentioned that before, that the ability for us to see the character of God in the morality of the commandments is very important. That's what God wanted the Israelites to see in that as well. So very good.
Dave, also in Proverbs 6, as you alluded to, these are abominations. Those 7 things are abominations.
Yes.
All abominations are sin, but not all sin is an abomination.
Yes.
Maybe a way to think about it. So this just shows God's even more abhorrence for those 7 things that are listed there. These are things that really disgust him.
That's right. Okay, that's very good thought. And the fact that two of them have to do with the truth shows how much he values the truth in that. An interesting proverb in Proverb 25, verse 18, a man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a war club or a sword or a sharp arrow. But what are those things? Well, they're weapons as you use against other people. So that's what the proverb writer, the image the proverb writer is doing. Would you take a club and hit somebody over the head with it? Well, maybe not. But if you're willing to lie about that person, or to even not be careful about what you say, that in terms of innuendo or gossip about that person, then you're using a weapon against him. It's just like hitting him with a club. So there's yeah. Go ahead.
Also in Proverbs 19:5, it says, a false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will not escape.
Will not escape. So it's going to come back. It's going to come back. And God has a way of doing that, I think, not just in the last day, but even in our own human experience of bringing the lie back around, where a person has to face up to it or pay the consequences of lying, particularly about lying about other people. It comes back to haunt them. Very good thought. Now, think about this: the presence of false witness in the scriptures. Who are the victims of false witness in the Bible? Where do we see this sin acted out in the lives of others? And I know you could probably add to this list, but let's think about David. And the 27th Psalm talks about the witnesses that are against him, those who lie about him. And David ran into that often, where he was lied about, and some of the Psalms bring that about. About Joseph. When did Joseph struggle with this? Who lied about him?
His brothers.
His brothers did. They lied. They said that he died. But even the idea of after he was a slave, he faced the idea of false witness by Potiphar's wife.
Yes.
Potiphar's wife accused him of raping her, and he had very little ability to disprove that. He had no ability to disprove it, and he suffered as a result of that. So Joseph was one who really, in the Old Testament, really bore the brunt of false witnesses. Genesis chapter 39. A couple of others, Naboth. Remember Naboth? The period of Jezebel and Ahab. Ahab wanted what did Naboth have that Jezebel wanted, that Ahab wanted?
His field.
His vineyard. He wanted his vineyard. And so he got some guys to lie about that. And it says the two scoundrels came and sat opposite him, talking about Naboth, sat opposite him and brought charges against Naboth before the people, saying, Naboth has cursed both God and king. So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death. 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 13. So they just got in a public place. Somebody made a public charge that was false, and they put him to death. This is a conspiracy. It was I don't know how well it was planned, but certainly it had devastating effects for Naboth that someone was willing to lie about him. Essentially, the Old Testament calls them scoundrels. Goes back to the idea that they're pretty bad people here, that would testify against him. Of course, Ahimelech is another example of that. And the 85 priests that are mentioned there, that Ahimelech was a priest during the time of David, and he aided David. David, while he was running from Saul, came and Ahimelech gave him something to eat, helped him out. And then there's the account, if you remember, there's the account of where in 1 Samuel 22 that Saul is whining and crying about, nobody ever cares about me, and my own people don't tell me what's going on with David, and all you people are against me. And that Doeg, the Edomite, speaks up and says, well, I saw David, I saw Ahimelech the priest giving David food and helping him out. And of course, that was what he said was true, but it was said in an accusatory way, to the point that what Saul did is he went to Ahimelech and sent Doeg to Ahimelech, and Doeg killed him, not only the Ahimelech, but also 85 priests. I think 85 priests, is that right? Of God's people. Probably one of the most heinous crimes that Saul ever committed, and maybe even any king of Israel ever committed, was committed by when Doeg took the life of those 85 priests. I can't think of anything that is any worse than that a king of Israel did. And the reason it took place is because of false witness, because they characterized something that even was true in such a way that it brought an accusation against an innocent man. And I think that's something we have to recognize. It's possible to tell the truth, but to spin it in such a way that it becomes an accusation of evil, and thereby then brings actions against people that are innocent because of what we have done. And so that's what happened with Ahimelech. And then, of course, there's Jesus. Jesus have any false witnesses against him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he sure did. In Matthew 26, Mark chapter 14, it says there that they couldn't agree. They were so far apart that they did not convince Pilate at all of what was going on. But they were able then to use those false witnesses ultimately to bring about Jesus's crucifixion in that regard. And then there's Stephen, Acts chapter 16, 6 verse 13. There were false witnesses brought against Stephen, which again eventually led to his death as well, as he preached to them. And then, of course, Paul, Acts chapter 16, he also had people that stood up and said things that were wrong, testified against him falsely in Acts chapter 16, Acts chapter 24. So that's just a partial list, maybe, of all the damage that false witness has done among God's people. Kind of tell us why God is concerned about it, because innocent people, you see, are hurt. And all of those people up there are not sinless, but they were innocent of the charges. Well, one of them is sinless, but all the others are innocent of the charges that were brought against them. They were not punished because of what they had done. They were the victims of false witness. Hey, any thoughts on any of that? Okay. Another question. What are the ways we bear false witness today? I guess that maybe one to ask you, do you think this law still applies today? I know we're not under the law of Moses, but are we still prohibited from bearing false witness?
Yes.
And how would we know that?
The Bible.
Well, Ephesians 4:15 says, speaking the truth in love.
Okay.
That's to
right.
be a part of our lives.
Yeah, that's right. And lie not to one another, but speak the truth in love. Paul says that both of those things in the book of Ephesians. So the Bible certainly condemns lying, and maybe we'll show some passages about that in just a minute. But so this applies to us, but in what way can we specifically see the application of false witness? How is it described in the New Testament? I think one way would be slander. The word slander in the New Testament very closely aligned with the idea of the term Hebrew term for false witness, in the sense that it means to speak with malicious intent to discredit another person by lying for them. So slander is not something that you do accidentally. It's a lie that's intended to bring harm upon another person, just like they did with Jesus and they did with Paul in that regard. So I think that's important. Also, repeating gossip about another person. That you say something that you hear something that you don't know if it's true or not. Maybe you don't care if it's true or not about someone else that's damaging, and you just repeat it. And you repeat it in such a way that it's gossip. Now, the way I understand gossip is not that it is not just determined by whether or not it's true or false, but the motivation of speech that has to do with desiring to hurt another person or not caring whether or not it hurts another person is a big part of gossip. We are to speak things for edification. We are to say what we say to build another person up. When we do it with ulterior motives, or we do it in such a way that would bring harm to another person, then that's gossip, and that would be false witness as well. Okay. Another thought I had is being inaccurate in what we tell about others, to exaggerate or to express innuendo by the idea that something's going to give a certain negative impression about someone else in an exaggerated way, so that it implies something about someone that you want to get across. You don't come right out and say it, but you present it in such a way that the message will be gotten. And I think that's an easy way for us. I say easy. It's a prevalent way for us to be guilty of false witness, is that we are not accurate about what we tell others about somebody. Well, I heard this and I heard that, or we exaggerate. Did you know he did this? And then we leave it to the imagination when actually we've blown it up to be much bigger than it actually was. Whether it be good or whether it be bad, certainly if it's designed to hurt someone, then it's false witness. Another thing along those lines is repeating unsupported information about another person, even with good intentions. This happens so much, I think, on social media today, that we hear something and we don't know if it's true, or we don't know if it's false or true. It would take some work to find out, maybe, because you can see a lot of stuff on the internet about people. Some of it's lies, and if we're not willing to do the work to find out if it's true, and then to do the work of trying to use that information to help the person, that we just repeat that, then we might very well, be repeating something that's wrong. Even with good intentions, we might say something that would be inaccurate. We want to fight against evolution. Let's say we're making an argument against evolution on social media, and we hear something about some scientific discovery that proves evolution is wrong, and we just throw it out there. We think, well, that's got to be true because evolution's not true. When what we're telling isn't true at all. Somebody made it up, but we just repeat it for the good intention of teaching people that evolution is wrong, and that does just the opposite. It's false witness, because we have witnessed to something as though we know it's true when really we don't know it's true. And it's proven to be false, then we're proven to be false witnesses. It makes those who are trying to tell the truth out to look like liars, because they didn't do the work to find out if what they're saying was actually accurate. And I think that happens sometimes, even in attempts to try to combat what is wrong, to discredit what ought to be discredited. Harold Comer, I don't know if some of you maybe know Brother Harold, but he says some justify any argument in discussion or debate, however inaccurate, when their proposition is true. Here again, they are weakening the position of the truth by using an erroneous explanation or the wrong scripture. We should be hurt and shocked anytime we have taught the truth with a lie. So we got to be careful. We can't teach the truth with a lie. We're bearing false witness to the idea of what the truth actually says when we attach it to something that's not true. And some of it's just a matter of doing our homework and looking to see whether or not what we're repeating is actually true. So I throw that out there because I thought that I looked at that. I thought that makes sense to me, that we have to be careful about that, and be accurate. And sometimes
Dave, even when we're repeating something that someone said, we can change it just slightly, the way the devil did with Eve.
Yeah.
But we can change it just slightly, and it'll mean something completely different that
That's
we
right.
may not meant for it to mean, but that it was to the hearer.
Yeah. And social media really expands that opportunity for us to give the wrong impression, doesn't it? It's one thing to
Yes.
talk to persons face to face, and you're able to maybe recognize what they're saying, but you get it down where it's just something somebody wrote, and you don't know whether or not they're being sarcastic, whether or not they're being didactic, whether or not they think it's a joke, whether or not they think it's true. It's just
Right.
written words, and it can be so hurtful. You talk about this is some of the things about innuendo I think we have to be careful about. Like I heard the thing about the captain of the ship that wrote in his log, well, the mate was sober today. He wrote that down in his log. The mate was sober today. What does that imply? That implies every other day he was drunk, right? He might have been sober today, but he might have been sober every other day too. But the fact
Right.
that you write it that way, there's a certain innuendo applied to it. And I think we have to be careful about that. The devil sets those things up for us, I think, to imply something we didn't really mean in all of that. Uh, he does that with religious terms too. You know, if I talk about the doctrine of eternal security, what do you think of? What comes to your mind? I most often think about once saved, always saved.
Yeah.
But is there a doctrine of eternal security? Well, sure there is. There's
Yes.
but you see, but that certain terminology has certain innuendo to it, or what the natural way of it being. And if I just throw that out there, and people talk about being spiritual, what does it mean to be spiritual? Well, there's a right way to be spiritual, but there are 10,000 ways that have nothing to do with spirituality that could be come across with that language. Doesn't mean I shouldn't use it, but I have to be accurate about how I use those terms in discussion, because I might give the wrong impression in that. But I don't know if that's on our course or not. But the other thing came to my mind is misrepresenting what we have witnessed or heard, so that we don't accurately describe what we have seen, or there's almost an inadvertent false witness that we can have about things, because we don't know all the facts of the matter. We've seen something and we've made our own interpretation. There was I think it's Brother Comer in some of his writing on that maybe gave this illustration. I don't know, that's for sure. I shouldn't repeat it if I don't know, should I? But the idea that there was an episode of Little House on the Prairie, and I'm not real familiar with that show, but I think there was a young boy, and then there was a grandfather and a grandmother. I think I had it written down here. Mr. Olson, is that the grandfather? Maybe Mr. Olson. The episode was called "Mr. Olson Killed His Wife," and the idea was that this boy saw the grandfather was practicing for a play or something, and he took a baseball bat and he hit the mannequin in the head. But the boy saw it through the window in a shadow, and so he saw that image. And then Mrs. Olson was gone on a long trip, and so he came to the conclusion that Mr. Olson had killed his wife, and began telling everybody around town that Mr. Olson had killed his wife and buried her in the backyard. He just gave an inaccurate description of what he saw based on his interpretation of that, and it becomes false witness. So we need to be careful that we clarify with the truthfulness of something before we simply come to conclusions. We live in a society where if there's a video of it, it must be true. And I think we've got to be careful about that. Sometimes videos can be deceptive. We can see something with our own eyes and it not be actually the truth. And if we go out telling that because we saw it without, clarifying it to be right, then that can be a problem. So there are a lot of ways in which this, I think, this idea of bearing false witness comes into play. Okay, any thoughts on that? Okay, consider Deuteronomy. This is further Old Testament connection to the law itself. If a false witness arises against any man to testify against him of wrongdoing, then both men in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priest and the judges who serve in those days. And the judges shall make careful inquiry. And indeed, if the witness is a false witness, who has testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. So you shall put away the evil from among you. Now, this is a fascinating, I think, adjoinder to the law itself. God said, don't bear false witness. Well, how are we going to know? How's that going to be determined? Because it has to be determined whether or not witness is true or false. I think Deuteronomy here, the further clarification in Deuteronomy is that there will be a careful inquiry into whether or not this person is telling the truth. Because even though there may be two or more witnesses, it needs to be investigated. So you look at Jesus's trial. Were there two or more witnesses against Jesus? There was, but was there a careful inquiry to find out if these witnesses were telling the truth? There wasn't. In the same way about Paul, there was a law against false witness that would have, kept Paul from having to be incarcerated in the book of Acts, but and they had the right number of witnesses. 2 or more came against him, but they didn't pursue it to find out whether or not they were telling the truth. And that's what we have to recognize, I think, as we look at this, that God cares about whether or not people in this situation actually search after the truth. And often that's not done. That's not done. I find it fascinating. It says that they will stand before the Lord. What'd that mean? They're going to stand before the Lord. Was the Lord going to actually be there in the courtroom? Well, not physically like the priests would be, but the Moses was saying, when you're saying this before the Lord. He's the one who is judging your heart as to whether or not you're telling the truth. We sort of put that into the same sort of context here when we say, when you have a person raise their hand in court, and I swear to tell the truth, put their hand on the Bible, and maybe the judge will say, you're testifying before God and this people. The idea that you're adjured to tell the truth because God knows whether or not you're lying. I think that's maybe what we see in some of this. Okay, any other thoughts, comments on that? Ideas?
Well, I have one. I mean, it's not exactly, but the adulterous woman, there were witnesses that came that wanted Jesus to do something about the adulterous woman, but they didn't bring the man.
Yeah.
So they didn't follow the law.
That's right. They didn't. That was handled pretty poorly, wasn't it?
Yes.
I think Jesus saw through all of that.
Yeah.
I think certainly did, and the idea that they weren't really concerned about whether or not this woman had kept the law. They weren't concerned about her at all. They were using the law in such a way to discredit Jesus in that regard, trap him. They had no regard for the truth in that. Okay. So we have to be real careful about how what we say, and making sure the evidence is secured in the truth. Another passage I thought that applied here is Matthew chapter 5, in the sense that the Pharisees limited the application of the law against false witness, and they interpreted in the context of taking an oath. We've expanded that, and the way I believe it, that God intended to include any type of something you say about another person, whether it's in a court of law, whether or not you're taking an oath to do it or not. The Pharisees limited the application of that command, taking an oath, and they went as far as to say you could sort of get out of this commandment if you worded it the right way, and they're thinking in the right way. If you said certain things, you could lie about it. You could give false witness and lie about something, particularly in the oath itself. You have heard it said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, shall perform to the Lord that which you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than that comes from evil. Again, this is not a specific application to the command, thou shalt not bear false witness, but I think it fits into the overall perspective that the Pharisees had on truth in their interpretation of God's law, that it was something that could be manipulated. It was a way to manipulate around the aspect of whether or not you would actually tell the truth, even in the context of taking an oath. Now, you think somebody's going to I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to take an oath about that. I'm going to promise that I'm going to tell the truth. That is a mechanism by which you're trying to give increased credibility to what you're saying. And the Pharisees took that and turned it on its head by making it a way of getting out of telling the truth altogether, not of increasing your credibility, but of getting rid of any responsibility to tell the truth by simply saying, well, I didn't swear by it. I didn't swear by Jerusalem, and I didn't swear by heaven. Therefore, I don't have to tell the truth. So Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. So I thought there were some ways in which I thought, as I looked at this and studied it, that passage came to my mind. We had to be careful about our attitude towards the truth in a society where people spin it all the time. People spin the truth all the time. Do you think how the major news networks and society in general report things as being true, that it has any effect on people's thinking about what truth is?
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
a lot of people think truth is relative, right? They don't think there's any, the truth is not an objective reality. It's you have your truth, I have mine. And I think that one reason that has developed so intensely in our society is because of this aspect of people being so free to say things about others that are not true, and to bear false witness against each other with impunity almost. A person's able to say whatever they want to about another person, and people just accept it without evidence, without any type of proof that this is true. A person's reputation could be ruined forever just by the fact of what somebody says. That's pretty sad. Okay, a couple passages, we mentioned these before, or Jeff mentioned Ephesians 4. Put away lying, let each one speak truth with his neighbor, for you are members one of another. Colossians chapter 3, verse 9, do not lie one to another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds. And then at the end of the Revelation, verse chapter 21, cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexual immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. So again, that's that dynamic of the sin of lying being put in the context of other obviously very abominable sins, sexual immorality and sorcery and idolatry. There are a lot of folks who would never worship an idol, but would very much struggle with telling the truth all the time. So
There's also in Romans 13:9 is, for this thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yeah.
And so if we are really doing that, loving our neighbors as ourselves, then we'd treat them right. We wouldn't lie.
We wouldn't lie about them. That's a very good point. It's connected with what Jesus says. You know, the whole law is based upon loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. And that's one of those places where we see that certainly fits here. You love your neighbor and you love God. You respect the truth and you don't want to hurt the other person.
Right.
So that's a good thought. Very good connection there. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Even on lying in general, that help us along this line?
John chapter 8, verse 44 tells us that the devil is a liar. He's been a liar from the beginning. He's the father of all lies. And so that's the kind of company you don't want to be in.
Yeah. And that goes all the way back to Genesis, doesn't it? I mean, there's a sense in which this devil bore false witness against God in the very beginning, because he said, God is not going to punish you. You eat this tree, you will not surely die. When God had said they would. So his lie was a false witness against God himself in Genesis chapter 3. That's a good point, Jeff. Satan is at the heart of this, and we need to recognize that anytime we're lax about this, that we don't have a real reverence for the truth, and we're go over into his camp, we're working his work when we don't take that seriously. You know, there's a lot to be said about the sin of Ananias and Sapphira, about why they did what they did. But what the Bible points out is that Peter says they lied, and that you know they gave a false representation of what they had done. And they reported, as we talk about those original definitions, they reported an untruth and saying that they had given it all. So that, and there was pretty severe punishment to Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5.
1 John 2 has another example of a lying situation when he's talking about doing God's commandments. There's the one who says, I have come to know him and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. So they're trying to present a picture without doing the work.
Yeah.
Which is false witness really against themselves and to
Yeah.
God.
That's a good point. He issues false witness against himself. He makes himself a liar. Yeah. Good thought there. And connected that passage.
What do you think is the biggest motivation for people to bear false witness? I mean, what are they trying to gain by, is it money, position, power, pride? What is the motivation for that type of behavior?
All of those things, maybe, right? I mean, certainly even the idea of trying to maliciously hurt somebody else, hate and jealousy. I think the false witnesses against Jesus fall into that category. They were jealous of him. They hated him without cause. And they wanted to retain their own power. Therefore, they were willing to lie about somebody else. So there's motivations there for that to happen. And certainly it's in our society is the same thing. People are willing to say things that are not true about somebody else. And along those lines too, I think, since you brought that up about motivation, I think sometimes one of the motivations that appears is that people have a cause, or they're on a certain side. And so they're willing to say whatever they need to say about the person on the other side to support their cause. So, there are Republicans that will say bad things about Democrats, don't matter if they're right or wrong. And Democrats will say bad things about Republicans, whether they're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's true. It's categorized as fighting for the cause or upholding what I think is right. That's destructive. It not only is polarizing, obviously it's polarizing, but it's wrong. It's wrong to say things that are untrue about the devil, right? I mean, we don't have a right to engage in false witness against even him. So I think that's an important thing for us to recognize.
Yeah, but if we're going to speak as a witness, we better be sure what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna testify. We need to know for sure what we're saying. And that certainly comes to play in the idea of testifying for the Lord, testifying in the gospel message. We need to make sure that what we're saying is true, and that it's what God actually said in his truth. We don't want to bear false witness against his church or against his people or against him as well. We have to know the truth. We're going to testify to it. Yeah. And one question that comes up about this in terms of the general subject of lying, and I think we've discussed this before in a separate session, is the idea whether or not the commandment against lying has any exceptions. Is there any time in which it's okay to tell a lie, or is that a comprehensive command that we must always tell the truth in every circumstance? And in that class period we had on we gave some illustrations that people use in the scripture, like Rahab, and where individuals obviously lied who were later on blessed by God, and talked about, how do we interpret that in terms of the scriptures? I'm absolutely convinced that the prohibition of lying is a universal application commandment. There is no time in which it's right for me to lie. Even if I thought by lying I would save the life of my children, is wrong to lie. And I think that's I think that's supported by what the scriptures teach. But that's a pretty hotly debated item in some quarters about whether or not it's okay to lie sometimes, and relative. In fact, it wasn't too long ago, maybe within the last 2 years, I heard a gospel preacher. I actually take that back. It was a Bible class teacher. No, I take that back. It was a gospel preacher who was teaching the Bible class, who said that under certain circumstances it was okay, because God would not want the other thing to happen. So, and the case of Rahab was brought up, but particularly the idea here of whether or not someone was going to kill your children, and they ask you where they're at. Are they hiding in the closet? And they were going to kill your children. It's okay to tell them, no, they're not there, to lie about it in order to save your children. And his perspective that it was. And I probably should have not spoken up, but I spoke up. I told him I didn't think it was right. I just don't think that, and it wasn't at Southside. I clarify that it wasn't here; it was someplace else. But the idea that that it's always wrong to lie, I think, is fundamental to our understanding of who God is. It goes back to what Barbara said a few moments ago. If this law reflects the character of God, there are no exceptions, because God never lies to us under any circumstances. And so that answers that question for me anyway.
Can I say something, Dave?
Yeah.
In that regard, I'm just going to say, if somebody came in and your children weren't yet of age, let's say, which is why you would probably be doing that anyway, they'd be there. They go to God anyway.
Yeah. Well, here's my take on that too. A lot of that discussion assumes that I have to answer. It assumes that I have to respond at all. I don't have to say anything.
That's right.
People can ask me a question about something. I don't have to respond to it. I can just keep my mouth shut and not lie. And at the same time, it might not be the way I think I ought to try to protect my children, but I'm assuming that if I tell the lie, that it would protect my children. It's like Abraham lied about Sarah being his sister because he wanted to protect her. Well, it didn't work. He didn't protect her. God protected her. His lie had nothing to do with whether or not she was saved from being taken from him or being abused. It was actually a distraction and maybe put her in more danger than if he'd not lied about it. But the lie, I assume that if I tell the lie, it'll have the results that I want. And that's the assumption that's wrong. I can't assume that if I tell a lie, things will be better, because they're probably going to be worse. And they certainly will in the end.
Yeah.
So,
and it sure is a test of our faith when we're in a situation.
Absolutely. Severe test of our faith in a situation like that. No less of a test of our faith that if somebody asks me if I'm a Christian, I'm going to chop my head off, and he's going to ask me if I'm a Christian. Am I going to lie about that to save my life? Well, we probably all answer no, wouldn't we? We'd say no. Let him chop your head off. You're a Christian. And so I think the same thing is brought into view. It is exactly what Ralph is saying. It's a test of our faith, whether or not we're going to tell the truth. A severe one, but it's certainly that. Okay. So false witness is something we have to be very careful about. And I appreciate everybody participating in this. We'll continue with the 10th commandment. Everybody know what the 10th commandment is? Thou shalt not covet. I think is the 10th commandment. Am I right about that?
That's
Thou shalt
correct.
not covet, or not covet their husband, the neighbor's wife. So next week, the Lord willing, we'll talk about covetousness. Obviously, that's a New Testament topic. The word covetousness is used several times. And the verb covet is used several times in the scriptures, in the New Testament scriptures. But also we'll look at it from the context of the Old Testament law itself, why God thought it was important for the Israelites to obey this law, the 10th of the commandments. Okay, thank you for your attention, for the good class and all the comments. I appreciate it very much. And once again, thanks to Jeff and Ralph for filling in for me on this. I really appreciate it very much. But Jeff's going to help me work out how to get the more consistency in sending out the invitation. So maybe we won't have the problems that we had today. Well, I apologize for that, but we'll try to get all that straightened out. If you know others that want to be on that list to get the invitation, if you let me know, then we'll make sure we get them on the list and try to include as many people as we can in the class. Okay, well, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Dave.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you later. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.